Polynesian people, but there are no black people. And the people who are doing this at the time were white people, of course. There's nobody else there.
Exactly.
So you have white people doing the same thing. These girls are getting pregnant. This is a big issue there because it's a heck of a lucrative business. You get pregnant, the government puts you in an apartment, they give you a car, they pay all your expenses, and if you get pregnant again, they come back again and they pay you more money. I mean,
exactly. Well, let's go back to the myth versus reality, because the subject here is affirmative action quotas. You know, the myth is that anybody that opposes affirmative action quotas are racist, right? But the reality is, what I found in my research is there's all types of black Americans who oppose it. Ward Conley, you know who he is.
Yes.
He goes around in states running petition drives to overturn racial preferences and quotas in hiring. And he's been very successful. There are other prominent blacks, Stanley Crouch, Bill Cosby, Shelby Steele, and others who have just come right out and say blacks have the same opportunity as whites. So obviously they're not for quotas or affirmative action. And then my favorite is a gentleman named Michael Massey. Do you know who he is? He's the head of Project 21, which is a network of conservative blacks.
I've never met him, but I've read his pieces.
Right.
I know.
Well, what he said I think is worth quoting. Here's quoting this gentleman. He says that this is referring to the Civil Rights Act when it was passed. And he says, blacks have been systematically stripped of their dignity, converted from self-sufficient, pride-filled, patriotic Americans to wards of a liberal nanny government who are motivated by rage, resentment, and animus. He goes on to say, it is wrong-minded separatism that recognizes persons based on color of skin rather than their nationality as American. And nothing, not even abortion, has done more to divide America. I agree with him.
He's absolutely right. And of course, he's black.
He's black.
This is a black commentator.
And then the Pew Research, they do a study where they interview black college graduates, and they identify with white college graduates, not with poor blacks. Almost half of them think that they shouldn't be singled out as a race. Their opinion. So they're getting away from this. But the reason I think it's important for people to understand how this affects their life is because it does affect our life in every way. As I see it, when the government goes outside its constitutional bounds and gives a special group status, a legal status to people based on the color of their skin, on their sex, on their sexual preference, or orientation, as they call it, what that does is and this is going back to the communist plan, it separates us.
It separates us. Here's another problem in the black community most people are totally unaware of. And I've asked the people involved about this, and they tell me, yeah, it's true. In fact, I did a piece on the subject in my newest book, Why Women Are So Crazy. And this is about black women. You notice that you run into many black women who are so strong, decisive. I mean, this is a characteristic of so many, not all, of course, but you run into so many black women who are so strong. They have such strong characters. Why? Well, they've had to do that in order to survive.
Right.
Well, now you've got a problem is you see these black ladies, they're beautiful, they're beautifully dressed, they're beautifully groomed, they have master's degrees. They can't find husbands. Why? Because the men that they might have considered as husbands are standing on the corner in the hood. They can't say neighborhood. They're standing in the hood, and they're wearing handkerchiefs on their heads. They're loaded on something, and they're standing all day like this. Well, a lady with a master's degree is not going to consider a guy standing on the corner like this as a possible father for her children. And so I've asked black ladies, am I right here? And they say, yes, this is a definite problem. Another problem in the black community, most people who are not black, of course, have no understanding of that, and I've never heard of it, but apparently this is another part of the fallout. There are so many aspects to this, destructive aspects.
You know, another thing that occurred to me is we start giving special rights, not individual rights, but special rights to these this group based upon your minority status. But then as we evolved, and I want to ask you about it, did the communists actually foresee that we go from civil rights to equality, which is supposed to be under the law, but it turns out to be civil rights, which is special rights for a group. Then we need equality for the sexes. Well, then we're into women's rights. Well, women's rights takes us into reproduction rights, which is the abortion issue, which of course takes away my right not to want to pay for somebody's abortion. But once again, they have a special status with the government behind them, and it forces people like you and me, we lose our rights in that case. Then we need equality of sexual orientation. Now we're into gay rights or transgender rights or however they want to say it. So it just goes on and on and on. I mean, any group of people can get together on any issue now and demand that the government give them special status rights. And hasn't this fundamentally changed our society? It's been a social revolution, hasn't it?
That's what this is. We are in the middle of a revolution that is affecting every aspect of our civilization. And I run into many people, they hold their heads. What's happening here? Every aspect, everything I run into, it seems to be standing on its head. Why is that? All right, you mentioned revolution. Here is why this is happening. Remember that in the beginning, and I'm calling the beginning 1917, when the United States government installed communism in power in Russia. I'm not going to take time to explain that now, but that's what happened. We'll do another show on that. All right. So you've got the communists in Russia in 1917. They seize control in a military operation. They seize control of a few buildings, the telephone exchange, the military barracks, a few buildings in one city that they called Petrograd at the time. Now it's back, the original name, St. Petersburg. They then began making calls throughout the country. People pick up the phones in Sverdlovsk and say, who's calling? This is the new government in Moscow and at Petrograd, and they see it's coming from there through the telephone exchange. Okay, using that power they had seized in this military coup, they forced communism down on the people. Now they look at the United States. Can they do that here? No, we can't. We can't seize the government here. It's too strong. We'd be exterminated. So the founder of the Italian Communist Party, Antonio Gramsci, the men in the Frankfurt School in Germany who corresponded to Gramsci, they figured out a technique. Instead of attacking the government, seizing the government, and then forcing the communism down, we will go to the institutions and seize the institutions, corrupt, pervert, subvert, infiltrate, permeate the institutions, collapse the institutions. Then the government will fall like overripe fruit into our hands, because if you destroy the foundations, the thing on top of the foundations will collapse. So they infiltrate all of our institutions, permeate, subvert.
You're talking church, school.
Every institution.
Okay.
And that is why you see all of these things happening. That's why everywhere you look, you see every institution is standing on its head. School, media, business, everything standing on its head. The fiscal situation, the economy. Why? Because they are working assiduously to collapse the basis of our civilization so that the government will now collapse into their hands. And then, using this reverse technique, they can seize power and impose a communist totalitarian dictatorship on our country.
And of course, most people out there if they communism, aren't they gone? Are they dead? Well, whether they're alive or not now, their agenda obviously was successful.
Their agenda was successful, yes.
And it is dangerous because it threatens our individual rights.
And remember, ask yourself, how do we know the communists collapsed? How do we know that? We know it because they said so.
Exactly. I agree with you.
Hey, look at us. We collapsed. Isn't that how you know? Well, we never believed anything they said from the very beginning, but suddenly they make a statement, we collapsed, and now we believe everything.
Well, and there's another where we go. If we have to have equality